I rewrote Age of Ultron. I rewrote Age of Ultron. I rewrote Age of Ultron. I rewrote Age of Ultron.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
I rewrote Age of Ultron. Then I made a whole bunch of TikToks explaining what I changed and why. Here they are, compiled for your viewing convenience. If you'd like to read along, links to the script are below. So join me, discount Darcy Lewis, for the Ultron remix. Well, Black Widow was pretty good, and I've been dragged back into Marvel hell, so might fuck around and rewrite Age of Ultron in its entirety. Step 1, suffer.
Oh, why do you suck?
Step 2, analyze. This is the beat board. This is the plot simplified to its most basic cause and effect trajectory. And this is what happens when I go full It's Always Sunny meme and write a new story in around those plot beats. Now all that's left to do is write a treatment, spend a week at your standing desk writing the whole thing out, edit, proofread, arm wrestle AO3 for the formatting, and
Fine. I'll do it myself.
yeah, so I rewrote Age of Ultron just because I could and I felt like it. But it actually turned out to be a really good exercise in the ways that plot is not story, and a bunch of other cool things. So if you like screenwriting, or still have some salt to work out about Age of Ultron, stick around. Let's discuss. Well, I think it's safe to say that this got a little bigger than expected. The thing is the Ultron remix, it's on AO3, links are in the bio. But the fun thing about fanfiction is that you get to know exactly what you're getting. So here's what you're getting. The premise of this project for me was basically to keep all the major plot beats of the movie and make a new story around them. So what that means is the Scepter makes Ultron, who makes Vision, and Sokovia falls from the sky. But in there we also have a new theme, new subplots for basically everybody. That means no Brutasha, no farm family. Get that squared away. There's also a different nightmare sequence for Natasha, because please. And the thing about keeping all the major plot beats, I'm so sorry, I did still kill Pietro, but I killed him cooler. Okay, I rewrote Age of Ultron just because I could, and I'm gonna tell you in probably way too much detail how I did it. I sound like a murderer. With mild cosplay. Boom, Maria Hill. Okay, plot is not story. What does that mean? Plot is the surface events that are physically happening. Story is the how and why those things are happening. So if you were to summarize real Ultron and fake Ultron, and you shouldn't have had to read fake Ultron to follow along with this, you would say probably a similar thing. Oh, well, they get Loki's scepter, and then Tony makes Ultron, but Ultron is evil, blah, 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 and Sokovia falls out of the sky. Okay, cool. But what I did is what you might call rearranging the emotional furniture, and I love that phrase. So by changing the subplots and the how we get to these big milestones, I was able to change the story. Plot is the easiest thing to see about a narrative, but as a writer, it's actually not that important. It's the scaffolding that you build the good stuff on. Hey, I'm Shield Agent number 6. This is Fake Ultron School of Screenwriting, and today we're talking about ticking clocks. So a ticking clock is just a time limit that characters have to complete something by. It's really common in fairy tales, midnight, 3 days, but it can be added into any story, particularly where tension or urgency might be lacking. And I was actually really surprised when I went to rewatch Age of Ultron for this project, just how boring this first fight in the forest in Sokovia is. Even before we get into the specific story beats that I don't like in the movie. And what I decided to do about that is add a ticking clock. Rather than the party they're going to being in 3 days, I decided to make it tonight. So they have to complete this mission, get back from Europe, and attend the party, which means when they come across the scepter, which they're not expecting, it's both a good thing and a problem. Tension. And it gives them something specific to banter about. What are we wearing? Who's going, who doesn't want to go? And so on. Welcome back to the Fake Ultron School of Screenwriting, and today we're talking about this plot beat. So one of the first things I did was remove the part in the beginning where Wanda gives Tony the nightmare vision of how Endgame Infinity War is gonna go. And I'll talk about why I removed that in a different video. What I want to talk about now is what I replaced it with, because that vision is the main way that the twins are active in the first part of the story, and I wanted to make sure that they stayed active and important, even though I took that out. So what I had them do is intentionally get captured, and I think this is kind of fun because it means that they're at Avengers Tower for the party and the creation of Ultron sequence, so they get to be more involved in that. And bonus, I gave Wanda a conversation with Jarvis, which is kind of fun for later. So I guess now's as good a time as any to talk about my premise for this project. I was approaching this as if, pretending that I'm a writer being asked to do a pass on the script of Age of Ultron. So the Marvel bigwigs have already decided that our big sequel to Avengers is going to be Age of Ultron. And we've got our new characters, and our third act set piece is the city falling out of the sky, and our big character death is going to be Quicksilver. So I'm not messing with any of that stuff. What I'm doing is noodling in with the way we get in between these big tentpole moments. And in doing that, I'm trying to keep in mind what is plausible for a Marvel movie. And that means trying to keep stuff in the MCU continuity as best as possible, not introducing new characters really, not canonizing any particular ships, and trying to stay away from stuff that maybe I in particular would be like, oh yeah, that'd be cool, and more like, what might have really happened.
I have no idea what you mean. Yeah, Clantasha was always my ship, but it was way more important to me to prove that justice could be done to their characters within the framework of Age of Ultron than any shippy business I might have left over from my good old days in the MCU fandom. I did find myself having to cut a few of their interactions early on. The patch-up scene in the party were a little long, a little self-indulgy. I can talk more about Kill Your Darlings later. Also, if I were constructing an Age of Ultron story from the ground up, it would probably look and feel a lot more like the Thanagarian invasion from the end of the Justice League cartoon. I really love the idea of the Avengers undercover on the run, and the whole world is a threat. Ultron is everywhere, and they don't know who to trust. But obviously, the parameters are to stay within the story that exists already. We need to talk about Tony Stark, and we need to talk about two things: motivation and character arc. Let's start with motivation. Tony's entire motivation in Age of Ultron is based around that vision of Infinity War, but I have two problems with this. One, POV, it's 2015, Marvel hasn't crushed my soul yet, and I'm kind of excited for the Infinity War. So I don't really want him to stop it. I kind of have a problem when the character's motivations contradict the audience's like that, but more importantly, Prophecy just has never done it for me. I don't think it's a compelling motivation, and I really don't think it's needed here, because Tony already has all the pieces needed to push him into making Ultron. We know from this and previous movies that he's haunted by the events of New York, and we know that he holds himself responsible for everything that happens to his friends. I mean, his girlfriend almost blew up in his last solo movie. So I don't think we need any more than that to push him into thinking he needs something more. He needs to make Ultron. Character arc in part 2. Tony Stark, Part 2, Character Arc. So a character arc is just the emotional change a character undergoes from the beginning of a story to the end. And the Avengers movies are a little bit unique in this regard because any major development is going to happen in the solo films, not so much in the team-ups. But Age of Ultron is really being carried by Tony, so let's take a closer look at his arc. In the movie, it's Ultron is a great idea to, like the old man said, together, but I feel like it's really a flip of a switch. It's not so much a building arc over the course of the movie. And I wanted to change that. So starting in this scene where he's trying to convince Bruce that Ultron is a good idea, I tried to make it really clear that Tony believes he's responsible for the safety of all of the Avengers all of the time, and the world. And he doesn't think he's enough to handle it. And I have his belief going from, I am the Avengers, personally, to we are the Avengers, we are a team whether I'm on it or not, leaning into that teamwork idea that was in the original movie a little bit more. By popular demand, I have acquired a beanie. Was this the easiest way to go about it? Probably not. But do I strike you as the kind of person who does something the easy way even when it would obviously benefit me to do so? Didn't think so. Anyway, I'm Darcy now.
Hey, I'm Darcy Lewis. This is the Fake Ultron School of Screenwriting, and we're talking about the party. So I made a fairly significant change here in that it's a different party that they go to, a different type of party. In the movie, it's Thor's going away party, so it's a little bit of a personal thing. Here, I changed it to a benefit gala for the Stark Relief Foundation, and I did that for a couple of reasons. One, your faves, now in black tie. But more importantly, it ties in with Tony's new character arc where he views himself as solely responsible for the protection of the world, so we get to see a little bit more how he plans to do that. The Stark Relief Foundation is mentioned in Age of Ultron, but I wanted to expand on it as a network of people and technology meant to keep the world safe, and that Ultron is meant to be its main protector. Which is cool because that brings us to 3, juxtaposition. While Tony is telling us his grandest hopes for what Ultron and the Relief Foundation can be, we're cutting back and forth with Wanda and Pietro discovering his plans for Ultron and immediately understanding the threat in this that Tony's not seeing. But there's more, part 2.
The party is also doing a lot of heavy lifting as far as setup goes. I ported over a couple conversations from the movie that happen around this time. Maria Hill tells Steve what the twins' powers are, Steve talks to Sam about the fact that they're looking for Bucky, and this is where I have Helen Cho's introduction, albeit under slightly different circumstances. I also used the party to either set up or reinforce a couple of character arcs, mostly Bruce's. And you will notice
I moved the hammer scene. But if we're going to talk about the real reason I wanted to change the party, buckle up, kids, because we need to talk about theme.
If you hate the concept of theme, that is understandable because school does an awful job of teaching this, to the point that I had a degree in English before I had an actual understanding of how theme functions in narrative. In high school especially, theme is like this word or phrase that you're expected to regurgitate. The theme is family, the theme is loss of innocence. That doesn't mean anything. It also makes theme feel like it's really stale and fixed, but it's not. It's an active part of the story, and theme is the conversation that a piece of media is having with its audience. Now, I think a much more helpful way to frame this is as a question and an argument. A story will often pose a question in the beginning and argue towards an answer. So in Avengers 2012, for example, the question is, can this group of people be brought together, and is it even safe to do so? And the argument the movie makes, after some ups and downs, as we explore this idea, is when we get to that iconic group shot at the beginning of Act 3, yes, they can, yes, it's worth it. So what's the theme of Age of Ultron? What conversation is the movie trying to have with us? Well, Ultron definitely wants to have a conversation about whether the Avengers do more harm than they stop, and that's fascinating. Unfortunately, it's also immediately muddled by his constantly changing goalposts. The Avengers are the problem, but actually humanity is the problem and they need to evolve, but actually they just need to go extinct. As far as the Avengers themselves go, I mean, I can make arguments, but it boils down to there kind of isn't one. There are a lot of ideas floating around, but none of them really come together into a theme. And honestly, I think that's one of the movie's biggest flaws. Maybe not the most obvious, but if you thought that the remix told a more cohesive story than the movie, my guess is that's a big part of why. Because I chose thematic questions early on, and I was able to orient a lot of my story choices around them. Straight from my planning document, they are, what are we to the world and to each other, and what does it mean to be a hero? And I think it's worth taking each one of these in turn. What are we to the world? Age of Ultron brings up this question, particularly with the way the people of Sokovia react to the Avengers, especially Iron Man, but I thought it could be carried throughout a lot more, particularly because one of Ultron's stated motivations is to make the world see the Avengers for the enemy he believes that they are. And this is the main reason that I wanted to change the party from something private to something public. This allows us to check in with at least how the American public perceives the Avengers, which is good, but that's not a guarantee because this is the first Earthbound MCU movie since S.H.I.E.L.D. fell at the end of Winter Soldier. So it's important to check in here. It also gives us a baseline against which we can read the public's reaction throughout the rest of the movie. And since Ultron's one of his goals is to destroy the public perception of the Avengers, it makes sense for him to hit them where it hurts, in public. What are we to each other? So Avengers makes this promise for the whole movie really, but especially with that shawarma scene at the end, that these people are friends now, or at least they have the potential to be. They've been bonded by this unique and intense experience of saving the world from aliens. And I know for me, and I think a lot of the fandom, that is part of the appeal, that they are friends now. But in Age of Ultron, I don't really get that feeling. It could be a couple weeks after the Battle of New York. These people do not seem like they've been working together for 3 years. They don't seem to like or particularly know each other. So I wanted to force them to answer this question a little more specifically. What are we to each other? Are we just coworkers? Are we friends? Are we found family? What does it mean to be a hero? This question is, I think, the logical follow-up to the theme of Avengers. Can we bring these people together? So now that we have assembled the Avengers, what does that mean? What does having a team of superheroes like this mean to the world, and what does it mean to them? That speech that Clint gives to Wanda during the Battle of Sokovia is, I think, one of the highlights of the movie. And again, though, I think it could be threaded throughout a lot more. And I think that idea provides the perfect opportunity to have a conversation that I think this movie really needed to have. Which means, is it time? I think it's time. Let's talk about Hawkeye. Does Hawkeye deserve to be an Avenger? I mean, he's one of my faves, but I understand the question. His skill set is a lot less super than some of the others, and unlike Natasha, he hasn't had a lot of time to prove himself. He was in Thor for like 2 seconds, and he was mind-controlled for most of Avengers, so why is he here? Now, you have a big chunk of your audience wondering, what's so interesting about this guy? And I know that feels a little bit like a flaw, but I think it's actually a great opportunity for some storytelling. Like I said, movies are arguments, so make the argument. Why is Hawkeye here? And to be fair, Age of Ultron does do this kind of. My favorite person in the MCU, Laura Barton, tells Clint 2 things, basically, on the farm. 1, you need to make sure this team is really a team. That's question 2, what are we to each other? And 2, it doesn't scare me that they don't need you, it scares me that they do. Now that is a fascinating assertion. Hawkeye is necessary for the Avengers, but like every other half theme that movie spits out, they don't really explore it at all. To be a subplot, certainly to be a theme, you need to hit on something a couple of times throughout the story to really make it work. So I wanted to make the argument that Hawkeye deserves to be an Avenger, and I decided to do that by having Clint ask the question to himself. I have no doubt that he knows he's the butt of the joke, and he wonders, does he really deserve to be here? With Iron Man, with Hulk, with Thor. One of the ways I wanted to do this was to really explore the relationship between Clint and Tony. Now, Tony is Mr. Avenger. Per his subplot, he thinks he is the Avenger, so he's taking on that voice of opposition, saying, no, I really don't think Clint needs to be here. There's a lot of animosity between them in the remix. And this forces Clint to keep exploring the question throughout the movie. So by the time we get to his speech to Wanda, he's answering, do you want to be an Avenger, to her, but he's also answering the question for himself. In that moment, he is realizing, yeah, I am an Avenger, and I deserve to be here. Ever since I started this little project, I've been getting comments like this, and I just want to be wildly clear about something. You're allowed to like Age of Ultron. The way we do media criticism nowadays is really caught up in what is best, and there's a purpose to that, and there's value in that, but I think way too easily we leave out the emotional experience of watching a movie, because that's what movies are, first and foremost. Analysis is something that happens after the fact. When you're watching a good story, you're just there. At least, that's how it is for me. So, if Age of Ultron made you feel something, particularly something you wanted or needed to feel, then it's a good movie. I mean, just because it exists as a pool of burning magma rotting at the bottom of my soul doesn't mean it has to for you. So, one of the changes I've made here is, in the movie, we have Maria Hill tell Steve that, okay, Ultron and the twins have been, like, robbing a bunch of places, getting a bunch of materials, but we don't actually get to see it, and that's understandable because there is a lot of plot happening in this movie. But I wanted to see it because I thought it would be fun, and, I mean, silly me, but I want more Avengers in this Avengers movie. So I have them all stumble into a robbery that they've missed and then decide they need a new plan on how to catch Ultron. What is their plan? Well, like in the movie, it's to use paper files to try and figure out what Ultron's next move is and beat him to it. The change I made here is that in the movie, Tony seems to have these files, they're at Avengers Tower, and that makes sense, I understand why he would do that, but because I have some of them going back to Avengers Tower an extra time later in the movie, I wanted to change this to a different location. So I have all the S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff in a warehouse that they all go to. I really let Steve take the lead here, which I think gives him a nice moment to show off that some of his more old-fashioned skills can still be useful. And I also like the warehouse because it's a fun little foreshadow for where Fury might be getting the helicarrier later. Is it even really a Marvel movie without Easter eggs? Of course not. So meet Abigail Brand, the last of my personal favorite Marvel comic characters to be recruited onto the big screen. She's half mutant and half alien, and can make blue plasma fire on her hands. Why yes, she is literally just She-Go, thank you for asking. She also comes with her very own dorky blue science boyfriend. She's usually either the head of SWORD, yes, that SWORD, or the lieutenant commander of Alpha Flight, which is Captain Marvel's space station, so I thought she might show up in a Captain Marvel movie, though rumor has it now it's looking like Secret Invasion, so that's cool. Now, there's not really a point to all this, except this is the run of X-Men comics that Abigail Brand comes from, and can I tell you who wrote them? It's like rain on your wedding day. So, you want to talk about the nightmare sequences from Age of Ultron. I always kind of assumed that Bruce didn't see anything. Like, Tony and Thor's visions are of the future, Steve and Natasha's are of the past, but Bruce's is the only one that takes place in the present, and he's the only one who acts on it. Everyone else is just in a stupor. So I guess I sort of assumed that when Wanda went into his head, she saw that there was no vision she could give him that would be as destructive for him as watching himself go on an unbridled Hulk rampage, so she just flipped the Hulk off switch in his head and let it rip. But, I rewrote Age of Ultron, and I did the nightmare sequences a little bit differently. So, if you want to see what I did and how I changed them, head on over. Hey, I rewrote Age of Ultron, now I'm telling you how I did it. We're talking about the nightmare sequences. So, the nightmare sequences in the movie are kind of all over the place. We have visions of the future, memories of the past, surrealist memories-ish of the past, and something in the present. I wanted to bring a little more unity to all of that. Also, per my thematic questions, my version of the movie isn't really about fear. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to make this work? Well, one thing my movie is about is, do these people deserve to be Avengers? And Ultron really wants to ask the question, are they actually evil? So it seems to me like the thing to do with the nightmare sequences is to say, all right, what's the worst version of these people? What is their darkest selves, the version of themselves they fear most? And probing characters' darkest depths is super fun, so let's talk about all 4 of the nightmare sequences in turn. I think it might be time for some color coding. Let's talk about the nightmare sequences. So Thor, Steve, Natasha, and kinda Bruce all get nightmare sequences that we get to see, visions that Wanda induces. And like I said in the last video, I've changed this to be not what they fear most, but the version of themselves they fear most, the worst version of themselves. And I've also changed the dynamics of how this is going to function a little bit. So in the movie, we have everybody just sort of in a stupor, except for Bruce, who goes on a Hulk rampage. I thought it would be fun to explore that by adding this little mechanic where when you're first put under the vision, you're just dazed until somebody outside of the nightmare sequence interacts with you. Then you interact with them as if you are still in the nightmare sequence and they are part of it. So that's gonna let us have a little fun with Clint and Natasha, and also explain why Bruce goes on a rampage. Fortunately, I am mighty. Let's talk about Thor. I rewrote Age of Ultron. Now I'm telling you how I did it. We're talking about Thor's nightmare sequence. The thesis I would like to submit to you is that Thor's worst version of himself, in his own mind, is somebody who has never gone through the character arc from Thor 1, the most extreme version of that. Somebody so self-centered and apathetic that he would gladly watch Midgard burn just for fun. And the way I decided to show this in all of the nightmare sequences is by having the character physically split into 2 people, their selves that we know and their darkest self. The surrealism elements from Steve's nightmare sequence in the original were by far my favorite thing about the nightmare sequences, so I wanted to sort of use that sort of element in order to convey how I'm going about it. If you'll forgive my wildly fake victory rolls, let's talk about Steve Rogers. I rewrote Age of Ultron, now I'm telling you how I did Steve's nightmare sequence. Now, this was admittedly kind of a challenge because Steve Rogers is a paragon. What's a paragon? Watch this trope talk. But basically, it's a character who's already so morally good that they don't need to change, which makes finding Steve's nightmare sequence kind of hard. But I decided to lean into the idea presented in Age of Ultron that maybe Steve doesn't want to go back as much as he thought he did. Snaggy shippers, forgive me, you got canon. But I decided to lean into that, and maybe Ultron actually presents this really interesting idea that can Steve function without war? And what would it look like if that were true? So I have Steve's worst self being somebody who just can't give up the fight. Let's talk about Natasha. I rewrote Age of Ultron. Now I'm telling you how I did Natasha's nightmare sequence. So Natasha's nightmare sequence in the original movie is how you say, and we can talk about that more when we get to the farm. For now, I want to talk about Natasha's worst fear, her darkest self. I think it's not the abuse that was perpetrated on her by the Red Room, it's the fear that she would turn around and do that to others, that she would become the next Madam B, training a new generation of Black Widows. So that's what I show her doing. In Black Widow, Melina has a line, "How did you keep your heart?" And I think Natasha's worst fear is that she didn't. Oh, she also kills Tony Stark at one point. Part 2? In her nightmare sequence, there's one more thing I want to touch on, and that is the recruitment scene. The moment when Hawkeye recruits Black Widow is alluded to in Avengers and in Black Widow, but we never get to see it. And the thing is, we probably don't need to. I think he made a different call, perfectly explains what happened in that moment. And yeah, there's a touch of wish fulfillment in me throwing it in here, but the cool thing about the nightmare sequences is it gives us an opportunity to do repetition with variation. In storytelling, the purpose of repeating something that we've already seen is usually to highlight what's different about it. And the fact that Natasha is split into two people and we get to see how that moment didn't go gives us kind of an excuse to revisit it. That's my secret, Cap. I'm always angry about the character development in Age of Ultron, but that's not this. Let's talk about Bruce Banner. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and I'm telling you how I did Bruce's nightmare sequence. Like in the original movie, we don't actually see Bruce's nightmare sequence if he has one. And the thing is, I don't think we need to, because however you want to parse it, and I've seen lots of suggestions in the comments of what he might have seen, I think we can all agree that at the end of the day, the Hulk is Bruce's worst fear. That is the worst version of himself. So off we go on a Hulk rampage. But this is where we can have a little fun with that mechanic that I added, where the person in the nightmare sequence doesn't act on it until they're disturbed. So Hawkeye figures this out, and then I have kind of cut to Tony being like, oh, yep, way ahead of you, as he chases Hulk into the city. Okay, this looks bad. Let's talk about Hawkeye. Now, Clint obviously doesn't get a nightmare sequence in either version, and I think that that's the right call. We've already seen him brainwashed, and they make a great joke about it when he fights off Wanda, and is like, not today. But I think he's worth talking about here because he does still get character development. This is the second time when I'm putting him together with Tony to force them to interact. The first time is way back at the beginning in the Sokovian Forest. I have the team pair off into groups of 2, and put Tony and Clint together, establish that Tony not thrilled about this. Here, I push harder on that by leaving Clint and Tony as the ones who have to navigate this whole our friends are brainwashed situation. And I have Clint trying to help him figure it out, here's some ideas, and Tony saying, no, I don't think I need your help. And rounding out the nightmare sequences, let's talk about Tony. Like Hawkeye, Iron Man does not get a nightmare sequence, and I cut the one he had at the beginning in the original movie, so you ask? I kind of want to talk about Tony Stark's darkest self, don't you? Yes, I do. Just not here with the rest of the nightmare sequences. But there are a few things about Tony's character development I do want to check in on. One, like we talked about in the last Hawkeye video, he's put in opposition with Clint. He thinks Clint doesn't really have anything to offer that he can't do himself, so he's going to go stop Hulk's rampage on his own. Also, I added this little moment where part of the technology in his helmet doesn't exactly work the way he's expecting now that Jarvis is gone. I feel like they really glossed over that. Nothing seems to be broken about that function, and I thought that'd be fun. But the biggest Iron Man moment comes after the Hulk fight. I want to tell you about one of my favorite moments in the Ultron remix. And this wasn't something I'd planned as much as something that just sort of organically came about as I was working on it. But I added this little moment at the end of the Hulk versus Hulkbuster brawl that I really like. I think it's important. I think it's doing a lot of work, and I think the actual Age of Ultron could have benefited from something like this because it's something I presume did happen, we just didn't get to see. So I wrote in this small moment where after crack, the last punch from the Hulkbuster, Hulk is knocked out, Tony has to haul the now unconscious Bruce Banner up from the rubble. And I have it that the soldiers surrounding them don't stand down, and the civilians are still terrified. Because I think this really signals that Hulk is not the only person on the Avengers that people are afraid of. It's all of them. You guys, I rewrote Age of Ultron and 10,000 people are into that. That's insane and very cool. I believe some kind of Q&A is in order, right? Yeah, that's how this goes. So, leave some questions in the comments and let's do it. Hey, I'm Rewrote Age of Ultron, and before we move on from the shipyard fight and the whole Hulkbuster brawl, I want to talk about writing fight scenes. So fight scenes can be kind of intimidating, particularly if you don't know a lot about fighting. And on a big movie like this, I mean, you would have a stunt coordinator and a whole team responsible for making this happen. But as the writer, I would urge you not to write "they fight" and move on and let this team handle it entirely down the line, because the fight is still part of the story, right? You can tell in a movie when a fight is just cool looking and the story stops and they fight and then we resume the story later. Maybe a more productive way to think about a fight is another way to have a conversation. What are the characters who are fighting communicating to each other in their fights, in their movements? Who's winning and losing? So, yeah. All right, let's do this. Let's answer some questions, starting off with my two most common questions. Yep, I am now. I look for something that sweeps me away, that just takes me into another place, and I'm not even thinking about it at all. And then I go back and I look at structure and stuff to see how they did it. Yeah, I got a couple of comments about this early on, and I ignored them in a panic because I wouldn't know how to organize this, but it'd be super cool. So, yeah, let's think about it. The farm family. We're going to talk about the farm family, but they've never recovered from the farm family. I can show you my least favorite line, though. Romanoff, you and Banner better not be playing hide the zucchini. Natasha! I'm so bad at, like, actors and knowing actors. But if you all have some ideas, I'd love to hear them. This is so tempting. It would be a much bigger project, though, because, in my opinion, there's not a ton worth salvaging. Avatar: The Last Airbender. Live action Pushing Daisies. We don't know each other well enough to talk about the movies. The way people are good at anything. Practice and privilege. I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm also lucky enough to have an MFA in screenwriting. Earthbending! Does that count? Doesn't matter. That's my answer. This is actually kind of tricky because best is not favorite. Marvel's actually pretty good at having pretty decently made movies. I mean, if you want classic 3-act structure, you want Iron Man. If you want zany characters, you want Guardians. But the one I would want to change the least, because it's my favorite, probably Avengers, Winter Soldier, and Black Widow. Yes, and I can't wait to tell you about it in 5-ish years. This suggests that I watch a lot of movies, which is not true. Did you just watch Amelie, though? I mean, that's a good time. I've only seen the first couple, but they had me at Peggy Cap. Maybe, yeah. There are a lot of ways I can see this going, and several of them lead to more movies. Like when everybody animates a different 30-second chunk of a Steven Universe episode, that would be, I rewrote Age of Ultron. Now I'm telling you how I did it. Here, I want to tell you how I know we've reached the midpoint. So, in both the movie and the remix, the midpoint occurs on the flight from Johannesburg to the farm. And I know this not because of any time signature or page count. In both, it happens about 45% of the way through the story, but that's not actually really important because a midpoint isn't about timing, it's about tension. It is the major shift in tension in status quo that occurs in the second act of a story. And what's really happening is, I mean, if you want to picture a story as like fabric for a minute, you are squeezing on everything and you are putting the characters under more pressure. And that occurs here when the Avengers go from superheroes to on the run. Y'all, we're here. We've done it. I have been training for this moment for 6 goddamn years. Let's rewrite Hawkeye's farm. Hawkeye's farm family is trash garbage storytelling, and to explain why, I actually want to talk about Phil Coulson. Coulson exists in the first few Marvel movies as basically humorous S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. He's not given a full personality until Avengers, and this is done with exactly 2 pieces of information. He is dating a cellist in Portland, and he is a Captain America fanboy. Which one of these is going to come back again? Remind me. In this moment, you're not thinking about the cellist. You're thinking, no, Coulson is the person who most believes in the Avengers Initiative, and he's the one who's not going to get to see it. Also, he's fun, and I like having him in these movies. By contrast, in this moment, you are thinking about the farm family. And remember, this is your first time seeing Age of Ultron, and you don't know that this is a fake-out. The thought the movie is inviting you to have here is, what? No, Hawkeye, he can't die. He's got that pregnant wife and kids at home. What are they going to do without him? That isn't about Clint Barton. Laura's husband could be any, firefighter or S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who died in the Sokovia disaster, and you would feel the same amount of bad. You're thinking about the farm family here because you have been given no other information about Clint Barton or his personality to care about. My guess is what you're not thinking is, oh no, I really want to spend more time with this version of Hawkeye. That is trash garbage storytelling. Last time, I told you why Hawkeye's farm family is a disaster of storytelling that fills me with rage. But now, I'd like to reiterate a few of my main points. In song.
The family on the farm is totally irrelevant. Having a pregnant wife is not character development. Don't tell me that there wasn't time. The family on the farm was a cheap way to build sympathy. Instead of giving Clint any hint of personality, they managed with Coulson just fine. And then Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. ran for like 6 years at 9. So fuck Hawkeye's farm family, that cardboard cutout of a random family. I don't even know their names. If they vanished from the movie, nothing important would change. So fuck Hawkeye's farm family, that stock photo of somebody's family. Velma deserved so much better, and so did Clint, and so did I.
I am so glad you asked. Welcome to the Ultron remix. If you're new here, I rewrote Age of Ultron just to prove it could be done. And now, I'm walking you through all the major changes I made and why. They include, but are not limited to, coherent themes, basic respect for Natasha Romanoff, and yes, eliminating the farm family. Now, as some of you pointed out in the comments, the farm is actually kind of important in giving the characters a place to rest after the midpoint and all those nightmare sequences. So, what are we going to do about that? Super simple. Keep the farm, ditch the family. How are we going to do that? What's going to bring them to the farm now? See you in part 2. Hawkeye's Farm, part 2. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and I'm telling you why I ditched the family but kept the farm. As a couple of commenters pointed out on the Hawkeye song, the farm is actually pretty important in giving the characters a place to rest and recover after the nightmare sequences and prepare for their big final battle with Ultron. And that's true. Actually, most of the story towards this point is pushing the Avengers to this place of being on the run and having to hide and being together. Now, one of the many things I don't like about the farm family is we take focus away from that. Everybody's so busy reacting to like, what? You have secret family? That we don't get as much interaction between the core 6 Avengers as we could have. And like, that's the whole thing I want out of this movie is a last hurrah with the main 6 before we expand the Avengers and do big endgame things. How are we gonna get them to the farm? Easy. This is the safe house where Clint and all the other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who were taken by Loki were brought after the battle in New York to make sure they didn't have any, infinity goo left in their brains. Done. It has come to my attention that at least a few of you aren't a little bit obsessed with the live-action Scooby-Doo movies from the early 2000s. A bold life choice, but I support it. If that's you, allow me to refresh your memory. Linda Cardellini, who plays my favorite person in the MCU, Laura Barton, also plays Velma in the Scooby-Doo movies. I'm sorry, I've been putting off making the next couple of videos because it's time to talk about Natasha. Age of Ultron sins against Natasha Romanoff, from least to most egregious. Let's begin. Number 1, betrayal of expectations. This post sums it up pretty fantastically, but Avengers spend a lot of time establishing that Clint is Natasha's most important relationship. Her entire motivation in that movie is to rescue him specifically. Age of Ultron backpedals on that by saying, actually, Natasha's definitely not Clint's most important relationship, and he's probably not hers either. I mean, it's not illegal to backtrack on something that you set up, but it is annoying. 2, misogyny and general disrespect. This is a feared assassin. They're in a life or death situation. The movie is not making dirty jokes about any of the guys. Once again, life or death, and the movie is not making dirty jokes about the guys. And then, of course, there's this hot piece of shit, which, let's discuss. I don't even know where I'm supposed to start with this. Age of Ultron devotes Natasha's entire nightmare sequence to establishing that she was given an involuntary hysterectomy by the Red Room. Then, at the farm, she and Bruce have this exchange. He wants to run away, she says she'll go with him, he says, no you can't, there's no future with me because I can't have kids. Already a little yikes. But then, Natasha says, neither can I because this is what happened to me and you still think you're the only monster on the team. Now whatever this was meant to say, what it comes across as saying is that Natasha believes she is a monster not because she's an assassin who's killed dozens, maybe hundreds of people, but because she can't have kids. I don't know who needs to hear this, but having your bodily autonomy violated does not make you a monster. After asking if I saved Pietro, sorry again, this is the most requested, hoped-for change on the original Ultron Remix video, because this scene made a lot of people really uncomfortable. So you start with this character, who was orphaned, human trafficked, raised as a child soldier in a brutal program that turned you into a lethal assassin, not only of, like, foreign dignitaries and stuff, but also of the other little girls in the program. And through all of that, she retained enough of her moral compass and enough hope to want to get out of it, and took the chance when she was given it to switch sides, and now does incredibly dangerous things trying to help people in order to atone for the things she did as a brainwashed child soldier. You look at all of that and decide the most interesting feature of her backstory is this little footnote that she also had an involuntary hysterectomy at the Red Room. You might just see no value or interest in women beyond their ability to reproduce. Sorry, bud. Romance is interesting. Families are fine. But you take, at this point, your only female Avenger, and you make her plots in the sequel a romance about the fact that she can't have kids and about her getting kidnapped. Let's zoom out on that a little bit. It's not to say you can't tell interesting stories about any of those things. Of course you can. But Natasha Romanoff exists in conversation, both with the way her fellow Avengers are treated and with, like, the history of how women are treated in film, particularly in action movies, as damsels, as love interests, as mothers, as not the heroes, certainly. To quote Clint Barton, this looks bad. I know. I've been talking about Natasha for a long time, but there's one more thing about the Brutasha subplot that I have to talk about before we move on. I have been haunted, enraged, and fascinated by this quote from Joss Whedon since I first read it in 2015. Because it's so close. He's so close. He's so close. I am entirely here for platonic Clintasha. That's actually one of my favorite interpretations of their relationship. But here's the thing. If you want to show that your male and female characters can be just friends, and in order to do that, you put them both in committed relationships with other people, then you don't actually think men and women can be friends. You think if Clint hadn't been married when Natasha met him and they go out of their way to say that he was, they would bang. Kids, I would never do that to you. The log rip is alive and well in the Ultron remix. I think no matter how you feel about Age of Ultron, we can all agree that that is quality content. I rewrote Age of Ultron. We've been talking a lot about Natasha and Bruce's relationship in the original movie, so how are we going to handle that? That's a joke, because what I did is make Natasha Bruce's handler. Now, I like this because, one, it's my personal headcanon about Age of Ultron anyway, because it's the only way that I can sit through the movie or make their interactions make any kind of sense, is if Natasha is playing him. But here in the remix, I think it actually puts a lot of interesting pressure on both of their characters. For Bruce, we know from the movie that he doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want to be the Hulk. And this arc puts more pressure on that, confronts that more directly. And for Natasha, she just spent Winter Soldier learning to trust Steve. And the Avengers are her friends. Her first friends ever, kind of. And now she's put in a position where that friendship and that trust is compromised. How far is she willing to go to keep Bruce on the team? I reread Age of Ultron. Now I'm telling you how I salvaged the monster scene into what it should have been all along. So Natasha catches Bruce packing to run away, and she's like, "What you doing, bud?" And he says, You don't know what it's like to be a monster. And then she says, I'm not sure that you do. The Hulk can do some damage when you lose control, but have you, Bruce Banner, PhD, ever done anything like that? Have you ever taken a life on purpose? And Bruce doesn't even respond to that. He pivots to a different approach because he recognizes that she is correct. And look at that, not a single reproductive organ involved. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and I've been telling you about the new Brutasha, aka how I recontextualized their relationship so that Natasha is Bruce's handler, not his love interest. And there's one more major milestone for this relationship here at the farm, because this is when Bruce finds out that this is what's happening. Natasha says, wouldn't you rather stay among friends? And he says, are you my friend, Natasha? Or do you just need me? What's that called, a handler? That's what you are, right? My handler? Have you ever said 2 words to me that weren't trying to get me to do what you want? Stay for dinner. I'll take that as a no. This puts pressure on Bruce's arc of not wanting to be the Hulk, and Natasha's arc of worrying that she's not trustworthy to her friends. Both of that's going to come back in the finale. In the last few videos, we've been talking about Age of Ultron's treatment of Natasha and her relationship with Bruce, and what we're going to do about that. So now... No! None of that gets a cute ukulele song, we're moving on! I think it's about time we check in on Clint and Tony. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and as part of that, I pitted Clint and Tony against each other because they have opposing character arcs. Tony thinks he is the Avengers, and he's the only one responsible for them, and he has to learn that he's part of a team. Clint is worried that he doesn't belong on the team at all. We've hit on this subplot twice so far. First, right at the beginning in the Sokovia fight, when Clint and Tony are paired together. And in an even bigger way during the nightmare sequences when Clint and Tony are the only ones left unaffected, and Tony ignores Clint's advice and doesn't think that he needs his help. And their subplot really comes to a head here on the farm. Tony is, of course, making his classic Tony Stark quips at Clint and the farm's expense, and Clint says, all right, man, enough. Their exchange here accomplishes 2 things. It really sets up Clint's hero speech to Wanda at the end, and it lets Tony say the line that was Laura Barton's, that Clint is actually necessary for the team. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and now we're going to take a little field trip. We have arrived at the campfire scene. Now, this is actually probably my favorite scene in the Ultron remix. There were a lot of changes I was happy with, but this is one, I don't understand this decision in Age of Ultron, that the Avengers are not together that much. They're together in the opening battle, in the hammer lifting scene after the party, and then they're not really all together again until the final group shot, because Thor leaves the farm almost immediately, and I didn't want that. So everyone's gonna have a campfire. Rather than cutting around the squad dinner that they seem to have, I decided to make that the main event. Let us now discuss the campfire scene. Now the first thing that happens here, the first thing that happens is that Thor lights the fire by summoning a lightning bolt, and it's important to me that you know that. But after that, he is joined by Bruce, and I added this little exchange where Bruce asks Thor if he knows about any uninhabited planets. And they have just a quick conversation that I thought belonged there because we really don't get any hints of the friendship between Thor and Hulk until we get to Thor Ragnarok, and I think we could start building that foundation a lot earlier, because that's one of the most charming relationships on the team, in other mediums. And I also think it makes Bruce's decision to leave all that much sadder. The more people that we see still care about and support him, the harder it is, the sadder it is, when he decides that none of that is going to be worth it. The next thing that happens is a quick little exchange between Steve and Natasha. It's genuinely just 2 lines back and forth. He asks how she is, she says she's taken worse hits, and he looks like crap. But I just thought we needed to acknowledge the friendship that they built in Winter Soldier. That movie was largely about them getting to trust each other, and I think it's weird that we don't see that pay off at all in Age of Ultron. Oh, there once were 6 scraps of the universe, infinity, infinity. They condensed into stone, strong and powerful, infinity, infinity. What? You don't know this one? Right, so one of the things the script needs to do at this point is formally introduce the Infinity Stone so everybody gets why it's significant that Ultron cracks open Loki's scepter and there's a yellow rock in there. Now, I hate the way they do this in the movie, because I think it's a bad choice to take Thor away from everybody else for so long, and it feels weirdly forced to make him go on a side quest for this piece of exposition that he could conceivably already know. So, in the outline for the remix, I wrote that he was going to tell a little ghost story around this campfire, which is already, like, a choice I would have been happy with. But then, I sent some friends this text explaining that whatever I thought my best idea for this project was, I was wrong. It was having Thor explain the Infinity Stones via drinking song. You're welcome.
Whoever be they worthy shall possess the power of Thor! Obviously I have this. Yeah, so we've arrived at the main event of the farm. Why I moved the hammer scene. Now, genuine question, is the hammer scene not in your top 5 favorite scenes from Age of Ultron? If it's not, I want to hear from you in the comments, like, what are your favorite scenes? Because to me, like, this is the fun of the Avengers. They're just doing something, like, silly and team buildy, and we really get to see all of their different personalities. And I wanted to move that to the middle, to the farm, because, like, this is the core of the movie. The middle of a story is, like, you're doing all of this work to get to this point, so we can see this scene. And to me, in Age of Ultron, that's the hammer scene. But I have one more trick up my sleeve as far as the hammer contest goes. Because I did a little thing that really justifies it being here, and it justifies all the fun that we're having as we, like, stop and pause in the middle of this movie. Because the scene plays out pretty much like it does in Age of Ultron, and it ends with Thor saying, haha, you're all not worthy. And then Steve says, then what did you see? Boom. Mood drops like a rock, and we use that transition to pivot back into getting everybody to talk about their nightmare sequences, and then that'll actually give them the idea of where to go next, and we'll end up in Korea tracking down Ultron. But using those two emotional high points and low points, positive and negative, has a really strong contrast in the new version of the scene. Thanks, dog. Yeah. So Tony goes inside, gets surprised by Nick Fury, and then it hits him. Everyone's talking about their nightmare sequences, and they ask him, hey, did he have one? He says, no, I was out of range. But what would have been his? And Tony realizes that, at least as far as Wanda and Pedro are concerned, he probably already is the worst version of himself. And what is the worst version of himself? Well, it's probably his most extreme suit of armor. So I've incorporated the bleeding edge armor from the comics, if you're familiar with that. It, like, lives in Tony's bones and, like, goos out of him. I don't know. As the project that Helen Cho is working on, instead of just the cradle. And he realizes that that is the body that Ultron is going to use to make his new body. And we're off to Korea.
I rewrote Age of Ultron. Now I'm telling you to stop splitting up the party. I'm splitting up the party, but less. So in the movie, Steve, Natasha, and Clint go to Korea to stop Ultron. Tony goes to Oslo to check out the internet thing. Thor is off in London taking his magic bubble bath, and Bruce is just vibing at the tower. I guess, we don't know. Instead, I have Steve, Natasha, Clint, and Bruce going to Korea, and Tony and Thor on a mission to get back into Avengers Tower. Also, they're all in radio contact this whole time until the whole, like, Seoul highway heist business begins. Because again, I want more Avengers in this Avengers movie. I want them interacting and bouncing off of each other as much as possible. And this is a place where that can easily happen. I rewrote Age of Ultron. Now I'm telling you what became of the Oslo side quest. So as a general rule, I tried to keep the physical realities of the story intact, right? Like the places that they go to. But this one I really felt needed to be changed. Because this whole thing comes about because Fury comes and tells Tony and the gang that Ultron is after nuclear codes, and Tony goes to find that Jarvis is what's stopping him. Now, that is like an immediate global threat and problem, and I want to keep the stakes as personal as possible for as long as possible. Because again, I am more compelled by Ultron trying to destroy the Avengers specifically. So instead, I have Fury tell Tony that Ultron mysteriously is not in the Avengers Tower servers, though he should be all over them. He started there. And that is where Tony and now Thor go and eventually find Jarvis. So we still get Jarvis, but we also get to check in on how the public is feeling about the Avengers, because now there's a big protest outside the tower. Remember, we checked in on that at the ball. I rewrote Age of Ultron. Now I'm telling you that I agree. The MCU is better off with Linda Cardellini. Just because I cut Laura Barton doesn't mean I cut her. So, back at the party, we met Helen Cho, and we watched Tony dodge questions about what he's working on with her from both Steve and Bruce. Bruce is now with Steve, Clint, and Natasha on their trip to Seoul to stop Ultron. Now, we've been watching Ultron take over the genetics lab, intercut with what's going on the farm, just like in the original movie. And now, Helen Cho has a random white coworker. Her name in the script is Elizabeth. I hope you didn't think anything of it. Until Tony says, yeah, Bruce, probably something I should have told you, and pieces out over the comm, just in time for Bruce to turn around and recognize his former girlfriend, Betty Ross, played by none other than Linda Cardellini. You're welcome. I rewrote Age of Ultron. Now I'm telling you how I recast Linda Cardellini as Betty Ross, and I will make no apologies. I feel like by this point, the Marvel fandom at large had made peace with the fact that the Incredible Hulk is half canon, right? Those events are kind of technically Bruce's backstory, but I wouldn't read too much into it. I wouldn't expect to see Abomination again. I wouldn't expect them to follow up on that hint about the leader. All of that. And I was content with that. I was content that Bruce Banner got Mark Ruffalized, and I was never going to have to think about the Incredible Hulk again. R.I.P. Betty Ross. Until William Hurt reappeared as General Ross in Civil War, and then a bunch of movies after that. Where's your daughter, Thaddeus? What is she up to? And then I could no longer accept the just vanishing of Betty Ross. So I put her in my movie, because I could. A lot of love for Liv Tyler. All right. I rewrote Age of Ultron. Now I'm telling you why I decided to recast Linda Cardellini as Betty Ross. I have nothing against Liv Tyler in this role. This was much more a product of the parameters I set for the project of the Ultron remix, which was to use all of the pieces that were in the movie to create something else and stick to that as closely as possible. So by getting rid of Laura Barton and the rest of the farm family, I could either get rid of Linda Cardellini or recast her in a role of similar scope that, at least to me, is more interesting and doesn't make me want to scream. Hence, she became Betty Ross. I rewrote Age of Ultron. I recast Linda Cardellini as Betty Ross, and I think this led to actually a really unique circumstance as far as the MCU is concerned. I wouldn't go around recasting just willy-nilly, but I feel like it's fair game here because Bruce Banner has already been recast, and I feel like anybody we haven't seen since The Incredible Hulk is fair game for recasting. Now, what that does is the way that we meet Betty in the Ultron remix is that we see her before Bruce does. And if that was Liv Tyler, we would know who that was instantly. Now, that's definitely a way to go. By this point, the Marvel audience was well trained in the art of Easter egg hunting. But instead of that dramatic irony of knowing what Bruce doesn't, we get to be surprised with him when this random lady is like, wait, this is Betty Ross now? And we get that that makes sense because he got recast, now she get recast. And I get to kind of, pull the rug out from the audience a little bit. Honestly, it's probably a blessing that Betty Ross was not included in Age of Ultron. She's one of those characters, you might call this the Gwen Stacy paradox, where her relationship to the men in her story is her defining character trait, right? Her whole thing is that she's in love with Bruce, but her father is the guy trying to kill him. Now, that is a great and interesting dynamic, we love a little Romeo and Juliet tension there. Doesn't do a lot for her autonomy as a character, and it can be really hard to branch out from that. Like, even in the comics, you gotta get into the whole Red Hulk thing. It's been hard for anybody to redefine Betty Ross as her own person. And do I trust the forces behind the Natasha we meet in this Age of Ultron, the real one, to do anything good with her? No. The MCU has a mixed track record when it comes to fleshing out characters who started as heroes' love interests. If you watched Agent Carter, they did great with Peggy Carter. If you just watched the movies, less so. I've got my fingers crossed for Jane in Thor Love and Thunder. Who's to say? Now, when they don't do that, or in the decade or so between one of these ladies' first appearance and when they get around to doing that, you end up with a phenomenon I would like to call the Marvel science girlfriend. She's a genius in her own right, but don't expect to see a ton of her outside of the context of her relationship with the leading guy in her movie. And this did not start in the MCU. This goes all the way back to the comics where these characters come from, and I'm not saying I did any better including Betty Ross, I'm just pointing out a phenomenon.
Recently, we've been discussing Betty Ross and the broader phenomenon of the Marvel science girlfriend, but I feel like there's a little more about that trope that we can unpack. Make her white, make her hot, it's okay if she's kind of boring, flesh her out, better not. She's here to serve the boyfriend story. She's a Marvel science girlfriend. A Marvel science girlfriend. Smartest one in the room, except the man that she's paired up with, other than Thor. Finish her off, write her out, as soon as you've had enough with your Marvel science girlfriend. Your Marvel science girlfriend. As long as she has a PhD, it's okay if her guides her personality. Oh, were you expecting to hear from her later? Has anyone checked the refrigerator for the Marvel science girlfriends? The Marvel science girlfriends. A Marvel science girlfriend. Your Marvel science girlfriend. Any of these ladies are one of your favorite characters, you have my utmost respect, and I realize most of them are coming back in the next relevant installment of their franchises. I hope that only brings good things for them. I'm pointing out a pattern that exists, particularly in phases 1 and 2.
Fair enough. You know, the reason I care about Betty Ross as a character is because of a movie, but it isn't this one. But it also isn't this one. It's these. Let's talk about the Ultimate Avengers. Not the Ultimates. Fuck the Ultimates. The Ultimate Avengers. Hey, remember that time Marvel took some of the best ideas from the Ultimates and folded them back into the 616 continuity to create an, at the time, unprecedented Avengers team-up movie? No. The other ones. In 2006, Marvel Animation Studios and Lionsgate released 2 direct-to-video features, Ultimate Avengers and Ultimate Avengers 2: Rise of the Panther. Now, I have no evidence whatsoever to support that this was in any way a test run for the MCU, but I think it's interesting to read it that way, because these movies share a lot of similarities, both stemming from the source material and not. You'll recognize the basic plot from The Ultimates and Avengers 2012, although the Chitauri fight gets interesting when Hulk actually ends up being the big bad in the first of these movies. Here's our team. You'll notice Hank and Janet Pym as Giant Man and the Wasp, and also some pretty significant science support from Betty Ross and Bruce Banner. In the second one, they team up with Black Panther to defeat the Red Skull-alike-ish Nazi alien shapeshifter, who is Cap's nemesis and now also T'Challa's. It's a good time. Most of it takes place in Wakanda. What will you get if you were to watch these movies? Well, you'll get this voice for Natasha Romanoff.
Where are you running to? You have nowhere to go, Captain.
You'll also get this banging line from Bruce Banner.
Any questions? Any questions not about the Hulk?
I'm sorry, it's hilarious. You'll get Thor as a eco-protester. That comes from the Ultimates. I was never sure about this. And Roman Rogers shippers, come get your juice. You'll get that. Now, I am not necessarily suggesting that you watch these movies because they are kinda bad. But if you're going to watch them both, because they really do work better as like one whole narrative than like 2 kind of connected movies. But we're here to talk about Betty Ross. Part 2, Betty Ross. These are the Ultimate Avengers direct-to-video animated features, and they are the reason that I care about Betty Ross as a character. She is a pretty significant part of the movie. She's Fury's like go-to scientist. She discovers Captain America frozen in a glacier. She's building the rebirth chamber that's gonna distribute, they're working on like a super soldier serum, and in the second one she even gets to kick some alien butt for a bit with a gamma generator. She also, she has a relationship with Bruce, and they're broken up in the beginning, but they get, the usual drama. But, like, she's also friends with Janet. She exists in this world and in S.H.I.E.L.D. far beyond her relationship with Bruce Banner, and that makes her a whole character. That's it. You might be wondering, if so much of the Marvel stuff I like is partly inspired by the Ultimates, should I read the Ultimates? Well, that depends. Would your Avengers fan experience be better with any of the following? Not exclusively, and in no particular order: Hank Pym abusing his wife, Hulk threatening repeatedly to Betty Ross, and her being kind of into that. This exchange of dialogue. This exchange of dialogue. This exchange of dialogue. Thor barfing up the Wasp, I forget how we even get here. And Hawkeye using Natasha's face for some target practice after his family. Yes, his family. This is where the fucking farm family comes from. And look, I mean, they recreated this panel exactly. Why? Why this? Why this? Still, I don't want to hear me, it's from the Ultimates, it's canon to the Ultimates. All of this is canon to the Ultimates. Good things? Redesigning Nick Fury to look like Samuel L. Jackson. That worked out well. And, okay, Tony and Natasha get engaged at one point. Long story. But War Widow armor. War Widow armor. That's it. That's all the good stuff. Betty Ross attempts to fuck Bruce Banner on national television. Please don't read the Ultimates. Previously on the Ultron remix, Steve, Natasha, Clint, and Bruce arrived at the Eugen Genetic Lab to try and stop Ultron. Bruce realized that his ex is working with Tony to build his new suit, and there we are. Now, before the gang races off to try and stop Ultron from stealing the cradle, there are a few more things here I want to cover. The first of which is, let's zoom in on that. So since Ultron is building Vision partly out of one of Tony's suits now, I added this moment before they get there where the cradle's printing Vision and Ultron's like, wait, this isn't okay, because it's red and gold instead of red and green. He's like, I can't look like Dad, unacceptable. So the ladies do some science magic and boom, Vision is green. We reinforce Ultron's daddy issues and explain why Vision looks like a Christmas tree. I rewrote Age of Ultron. Let's talk about Wanda. So Wanda reads Vision's mind and the twins turn against Ultron, as in the original. But I have added a line of dialogue here where Wanda is concerned about Sokovia specifically. Again, I want to keep the stakes as small and as personal as possible, even as we're escalating here. Because, yeah, Ultron destroying the whole world is everybody's problem, but specifically him choosing to use Sokovia to do it is her problem. Ultron has revealed himself as worse than the Avengers about specifically the thing Wanda and Pietro care about, the destruction of Sokovia by Tony Stark. Behold, my hyper-realistic illustration of the gang chasing down Ultron and Vision. Importantly though, since this time we've stuck Bruce with them, he's not gonna go into the highway fight. So Steve leaves him to stay at the lab to get as much information as he can about what Ultron is trying to do, which means he's stuck with Betty. But even better, it means we get to do an awkward cutaway. So the fight over Vision proceeds pretty much as it does in the movie. Natasha gets on the motorcycle, she's going for the cradle, she's so close, she's in the container. Cut to Bruce awkwardly in the lab, like, so, you been good? And cut back to the fight. I just like that trope. It should have been Clint. And it should have been Clint here. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and in it, I had Clint get taken by Ultron instead of Natasha. Look, when the character you choose to damsel is your only leading female character, that says something whether you intended it to or not. Also, by using Clint here, not only do we get to have a little fun with the Hawkeye initiative, but it reinforces his new arc of questioning whether he belongs here and whether he should be on this team if he got captured so easily. Other than that, this change is not going to affect the plot at all. So the twins turn against Ultron and start helping Steve, but a train is racing through the center of the city, and then I rewrote Age of Ultron, and in it, I added this moment where Pietro still wants to go after Ultron. When Ultron escapes the train, Pietro's first instinct is, oh, do we see him? Let's go. And Steve takes a minute to say, that's not how we do things. And he just takes that little extra moment of initiative to remind Wanda and Pietro, or show them, what the Avengers actually do before he starts asking them if they can clear the civilians and stop the train. And I just think that having that moment maybe reinforces the trust that we're trying to build here between these characters. Probably my favorite innocuous detail in Age of Ultron is the old school spy stuff that goes on between Clint and Natasha. We don't get to see nearly enough of that, but I love the idea that with Ultron everywhere in the internet, they have to rely on Morse code and such. If I were writing this movie from the ground up, I would want to see a lot more of that. But what we can do here is, since I have Clint captured instead of Natasha, in Age of Ultron, Ultron sort of intimidates her and punches a robot, and then she gets the parts. Instead, I have Clint egging him on intentionally, or at least we see that more intentionally, to get Ultron to wreck the robot so he has the stuff to send a message. And I have him say, thank you for your cooperation at the end, because that's Natasha's little line when she's pretending to be at the disadvantage to gain her advantage. And I love that. Yep, this is the worst part. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and I'm pretty comfortable saying that the birth of Vision is the weakest change I made to the story. We're in a bit of a pickle here, because this is supposed to be the all is lost moment, the moment when things look like they just can't get worse and won't get better. In the movie, we have Thor fly in and be like, I saw a vision, and I hate that. I hate that so much, because it's not actually resolving anything. It's just an ex machina. So instead, I have the gang fighting so intensely that they don't even notice Vision has woken up until he's like, hello. And I think that works really well on a meta level, because Ultron's thing is that he is order and they are chaos. And this is so chaotic that they don't even notice that this is happening. Watching it, I'm not so sure. You mean like this? I would never cut that. I rewrote Age of Ultron. Let's talk about parallels. Back at the party, I had a bit of goofy fun by having a gear-up montage that was getting into their black tie attire rather than their hero costumes, right? So they're doing the same sort of moves, except instead of Thor summoning his hammer, holding his arm out, he's like putting on a dress shirt, that sort of thing. And that is just good character fun, and well within the tone of a Marvel movie. So we're already good there. But now, when we reach the beginning of Act 3 and they need to gear up for real, we get to parallel that. So every action that they do in the silly dress for the party montage, they do again with their hero costumes. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and we've done it, kids. We have arrived in Act 3. For the past couple months, we have been discussing Acts 1 and 2. We've been setting up character arcs, we've been fleshing out plot points, and now it's time to let everything beautifully unravel. I'm not saying third acts are never trouble, they absolutely can be, but with a project like this, where we're working on top of an already functional story and just fine-tuning a lot of the character stuff, it really should kind of be smooth sailing from here. The narrative momentum that we've been working so hard to build up this whole time is going to spill over and just take it from here. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and the first major change I made in the third act is with Tony and the kid. So in Age of Ultron, Tony rescues that family from the apartment complex that's falling down by putting them all in the bathtub. And that's a nice scene, but I thought we could hit it a little harder. So in my version, there's only a kid left in that apartment, and he's too afraid to come near Tony because he thinks he's one of the Ultron bots. He's a little kid and he can't tell them apart. So Tony has to take his suit off in order to rescue him, putting himself in jeopardy. And I really think we could get something out of the parallels or not with Ultron, and Ultron is so obsessed with the fact that he's not like Tony. I thought we want to take a minute to show the ways that Tony is not like Ultron, to the point that he is injured by one of the Ultron bots in rescuing this kid, but really showing his humanity and his vulnerability in this movie where he's been a jerk. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and I kinda hate the Ultron bots. In Age of Ultron, Ultron has this line where he says, and I quote, "I have what the Avengers never will, harmony. They're discordant, disconnected. But when the Ultron bots swarm on Sokovia, they seem just as discordant and disconnected to me. Even once Vision burns Ultron out of the internet, he doesn't burn him out of communication with all the bots, but they still attack like they're individual soldiers with independent decision-making capabilities going at the Avengers one by one. What I think should have happened, and what I put in the Ultron remix, is that they're a true hive mind. So they swarm. They do not behave like people, they do not wait their turn, and they are overwhelming the Avengers until they can cut that communication out. So what are we going to do about our new and improved hive-minded Ultron bots? I rewrote Age of Ultron, and I've given Tony a problem. Tony and Friday determine that they can shut off the Ultron bots' communication to each other with a hypersonic pulse. What is that? Don't know. Doesn't matter. What's important is that Tony doesn't have one in the Iron Man suit. He's going to have to build it out of wrecked Ultron bots. Now, for all its flaws, I think one thing that Iron Man 3 really was right to explore is, like, what is Tony without the suit? Because he is a lot without the suit. He is a genius. So we're going to make him do some battlefield engineering to compile this hypersonic pulse, and the rest of the Avengers are going to have to hold off the bots until he can finish it. Let's start paying off some character arcs. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and it's time to pay off both Bruce and Natasha's storylines. Bruce is both reluctant to fight as himself and terrified of the damage the Hulk can cause. Natasha worries that she's a bad person, a bad friend, and should not be on the Avengers. And remember, in Ye Olde Farm Scene, we learn that Natasha is Bruce's handler, and she's been lying to manipulate him into turning into the Hulk for battles. So Natasha finds Bruce just sort of awkwardly standing there, not part of the fight, but also with no way to leave, and she apologizes for manipulating him. He then says, okay, say you were my friend, what would you tell me? And she says, you saw how everybody reacted to Vision. If any one of us thought you or the Hulk were a threat, you would not be here, and we need you. And then he voluntarily turns into the Hulk, and they go off back into the battle. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and it's time for Clint's hero speech. No, I didn't cut Clint's go out the door and you're an Avenger hero speech. Why would I? It's beautiful. It's brilliant. Oh, but it could have been not what it was. We've added a lot to Clint's character in this version, so while he still gives essentially the same speech to Wanda, he's now also giving this speech to himself. Throughout the movie, we've had him multiple times attempt to ask Natasha if he deserves to be an Avenger and not get a chance to either ask the question or get the answer. So now, when he's telling Wanda, okay, your past, none of that matters. It's what you do right now that defines whether you're an Avenger, he realizes he knows the answer for himself too, and he walks out the door. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and if you remember, in Age of Ultron, the movie proper, and I hope you don't, Natasha is trying to get to the drill in the center of the city like everybody else, and she's driving like a snowplow, and Tony makes a rude line that I have discussed elsewhere. I didn't want that. Like in the movie, she says, relax, Tony, not all of us can fly. But instead, she rams the snowplow into the curb, flies out its open ceiling, and comes down the broken ceiling of the church on a grappling line from her wrist, landing dramatically next to Tony, yes, Yelena, a poser, and says, usually. Because I love her, and she deserved a dramatic entrance. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and we have reached the trailer shot. The Avengers, Wanda, Pietro, and Vision included, are assembled. Finally, around the drill in the center of Sokovia, and Ultron and all of his Ultron bots are attacking. Per the change we made here, the bots are more coordinated. They are working in unison as a single hive mind, completely overwhelming the Avengers, and if a single one of them break rank from the drill, for even a second, the bots are starting to break through. Right? Like if Ultron's thesis, at least one of them, is that the Avengers are too discoordinated to be any kind of functioning team, that is the thing that the finale needs to put to the test. So the more harmonious and coordinated Ultron and his Ultron bots are, the more we push on whether the Avengers can defend against that. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and by this point, the helicarrier has shown up, S.H.I.E.L.D. is loading people into the lifeboats, and that means War Machine is here. Now, as the Avengers are assembled around the drill, trying to defend against Ultron and all of the Ultron bots, Tony calls Rhodey over the comms and says, hey, can you bring me that thing I gave you? Remember, Tony has been tasked with crafting a hypersonic pulse device to separate the communication between Ultron and his Ultron bots so they can no longer move as a hive mind and will be easier to defeat. We learn now that Tony handed the device off to Rhodey when they meet up around the helicarrier, just like in the movie, a little bit earlier. And now Rhodey gets to come, Ultron's not expecting him because he's not behaving as one of the Avengers, and deliver the pulse. But there's a problem. I rewrote Age of Ultron. Rhodey has just delivered Tony's hypersonic pulse above the church to sever the connection between Ultron and his Ultron bots, but it's not working. Tony and Friday determine that there is a loose wire that is preventing the device from working. Tony tries to break away to go fix it, but as soon as he does, the bots almost make it to the drill. He cannot leave. But what was Tony's character arc? That he is not the only Avenger. Who has he hated this whole time, been pretty sure shouldn't be on the team? Clint. So he asks him if he can make the shot. And Clint can always make the shot. So the Clint Barton we always deserve gets a boost from the Hulk, flies into the air, shoots the thing, and it sets off this intense shrieking sound, the sound wave of which knocks him to the ground. So boom, Tony's had his character arc, and as a bonus, Deaf Clint Barton. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and it's time. It's time to talk about Pietro. I'm sorry, this still had to happen. Per the parameters of this project, I wasn't going to change any major decisions that Marvel Studios had already made, like which characters were continuing on in the franchise or not. What I did do is change the way we get rid of him, because I think a speedster and a bullet, that never did it for me. So instead, he's trying to save a lifeboat that is stuck on the edge of the flying Sokovia. The ground crumbles underneath him, Ultron catches him, and then, Ultron's not fond of traitors. Boom, speedster down in I think a more interesting way, because it's not something that his powers hypothetically could have compensated for. Sorry. When I rewrote Age of Ultron, I could have cut the lullaby entirely. I didn't. Mostly so the joke in Thor Ragnarok would stay canon. So the fighting is over, Hulk is getting restless and screaming at the edge of the city, like in the original. Cap calls Natasha for a lullaby, but she is busy making sure Clint is okay. Read into that what you will. But even if she wasn't occupied, Natasha's not Bruce's love interest in this version, so she's not really gonna get him to run away into space. Who is? Good thing we don't have an old flame hanging out in the wings. Yes, the return of Betty Ross. This goes from dumb thing I added for funsies to important part of the plot. She appears on the deck of the helicarrier, and she attempts to do the lullaby with Bruce. And yeah, I think him running away from a person that he's known and cared about for years rather than somebody he just started possibly dating is sadder. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and when I did, I tried to make it more about the Avengers as a group, which means I think we're more justified in including a scene of aftermath here, after the Battle of Sokovia. A scene of aftermath is exactly what it sounds like. It's a pause, a moment of rest after something big happens. You don't want too many of them, because they can slow the pacing of a story down, but one in the right moment can be really powerful. I think that's why so many people connected with the shawarma scene after Avengers, because it shows these larger-than-life characters as really real and really human. So after Vision saves Wanda from the falling debris, he brings her to the deck of the helicarrier. Natasha, Clint, and Steve are already there. Tony lands shortly after, as does Thor, and they're all pretty beat up and pretty injured, and they're just sort of collapsed in a heap as the medics run out to greet them. And I think it shows the toll that this battle took on them, and I like that moment. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and we end, as the movie does, at the new Avengers facility, of course tying up a few of the new threads that we've introduced. So Natasha is helping Clint learn sign language, there are some extended conversations with Fury and between Steve and Tony, and Betty Ross is there along with Helen Cho. Total side note, I added Betty Ross because I like her character and I have always shipped her with Bruce, but oops, I played myself, I'm pretty sure she and Helen are dating. Tony verbally confirms his character arc, saying he's not sticking around because he understands that the Avengers exist with or without him, and Steve confirms what was part of his arc with Peggy Carter liking the original, but just a little more explicitly saying that the Avengers are his family. And he's home, and he doesn't need to go back. Endgame. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and oh my god, you guys were at the end! The Thanos mid-credit scene stays the same, but then, as I'm sure you remember, Age of Ultron has no post-credit scene, which seems insane to me, because I don't know why we spent so long on the elevator's not worthy bit, if not to set up a gag scene at the end where, ding, an elevator opens and Mjolnir is just sitting on the ground. So I have included that with a twist. That happens, and then Natasha steps into the elevator. And she looks to see if anyone's around, and she looks at the hammer. Cut to black. Because if you've learned anything from this, I hope it's that Natasha and Clint deserved and could have had respect all along. Also, storytelling is fun. Wow, okay, this has been the Ultron remix. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and thank you so much for hanging out with me while I tell you how I did it. What will I do next? Will I rewrite Endgame? Will I make a YouTube video of all of this? Will I do a script reading? Maybe. If you want to know if and when I do those things, I have a website, and the website has a mailing list, so you can get an email next time I do something interesting and or stupid. Also, I realize it's a little late for this, but I did make a logo a while back. I think it came out pretty neat. Yeah, so see you next time. I rewrote Age of Ultron, and as we wrap up here, there's something I want to be really clear about. This was not a first draft. It was the first draft I worked on, but working on top of an existing story is kind of the same. You're polishing, you're smoothing out, all the pieces are there. The hardest part is already done for you. So just because I moved through this kind of smoothly, please don't think that that is how writing is usually supposed to go. I have a fantasy novel I've been working on for 5 years and I've never finished a draft of. So just keep that in mind. Also, even for this just polishing things up draft, this is just the display. This is the corkboard I was actually working on, and that's after a written outline. I've been saving it because it's important to me that you know that even this kind of draft is a mess. I rewrote Age of Ultron. I spent the last couple months telling you how I rewrote it, but before we're done here, I'd like to tell you why. I've always liked superhero stuff, but from 2012 to 2015, the MCU was my favorite thing, and I really needed it to be. I had just started college, and I was having a really hard time, but Marvel was a place that I could both escape to and a way that I could communicate with people and make friends. But at some point, that stopped. It was Age of Ultron, but it was a lot of things, and Marvel just stopped being fun. So I've been in this state of limbo for a while now, where I can't escape Marvel, but I also don't really enjoy it. This summer, I knew I was going to have to go see the Black Widow movie because she's my favorite character. I steeled myself for the experience, and I loved it. For at least a little while, I was back in that 2012 post-Avengers place where the MCU was fun and welcoming and this really exciting place to play. So even though rewriting a movie you didn't like probably seems like an act of spite, for me it wasn't. It was really an act of love of what Marvel used to mean to me, and maybe does, I don't know. And so if you've enjoyed this, if you've been hanging out with me, thanks.